The red ships came from the sky like a storm. They were huge, bigger than any building on Earth. The alien fleet blocked out the sun over every major city. People looked up and felt their hearts sink. The invasion had begun. The aliens called themselves the Crithians. They had conquered many worlds before Earth. 74 different planets had fallen to their power. They knew exactly how to break a civilization. First, they destroyed the military. Then they captured the leaders. Finally, they waited for everyone else to give up. It took only 2 days for Earth's defenses to fall. The Crithians used special weapons that stopped all electronics. Computers died. Phones went dark. Cars stopped working. Planes fell from the sky. In seconds, humanity was thrown back hundreds of years in technology. The military tried to fight back, but without modern weapons, they could not stand against the alien technology. Nuclear missiles would not launch. Communication systems were dead. Armies could not coordinate their defenses. City by city, the Crithians took control. Commander Vexthor stood on his ship and watched Earth burn below. He had 4 arms and a hard shell covering his body. His eyes were like an insect's with many small lenses. He had done this many times before. This invasion was going exactly as planned. His second-in-command, Zale, came to him with a report. The soldier's voice was nervous. He said that humans were still fighting even though they could not win. They used old weapons. They refused to surrender. They kept attacking even when it was hopeless. Vexthor was not worried. He had seen this before. Every species fought hard at first, but once he captured their leaders and broke their spirit, the rest would fall in line. He gave the order to begin capturing human commanders and officials. The capture teams went to every remaining military base. They went to government buildings. They hunted down anyone who was leading the human resistance. The Crithians expected to find scared people begging for mercy. That was what always happened, but the humans were different. In what used to be the North American Defense Command, they found Colonel Jake Morrison. He was coordinating resistance from a broken bunker. Dust covered his uniform. Blood stained his face. The building was falling apart around him, but he kept giving orders to his soldiers. When the Crithian soldiers burst in, Morrison did not scream. He did not try to run. He finished giving his orders first. Then he turned to face the aliens calmly. The soldiers put energy chains on his hands. Morrison just nodded to his men and said quietly, "Keep fighting. Do not give up." The leader of the capture team had taken prisoners from 30 different invasions. He had never seen anything like this. The human showed no fear. His eyes were cold and calculating. He looked at each alien soldier carefully as if he was memorizing their faces. As if he was planning something. The same thing happened all over the world. In London, they captured General Patricia Hayes while she was helping people escape. She only surrendered after the last civilian was safely away. In Tokyo, Admiral Kenji Nakamura destroyed 3 alien ships before they finally caught him. In São Paulo, Commander Carlos Rivera fought until his last bullet was gone. None of them begged for mercy. None of them cried. None of them showed any fear at all. The Crithian soldiers started to feel uncomfortable. This was not normal. Prisoners were supposed to be afraid. They were supposed to break down. They were supposed to realize they had lost. But these humans acted like they were just waiting for something. By the end of the first week, the Crithians had captured 200 human leaders, military commanders, government officials, scientists, and resistance organizers. They were all brought to the main ship, the Dominator. They were put in special prison cells designed to break the strongest prisoners. The cells were deliberately cruel. The walls were clear, so prisoners had no privacy. Bright lights shined all the time, making sleep impossible. The temperature changed constantly from freezing cold to burning hot. Food came at random times. Guards watched everything. Vexthor had designed these cells himself. He had used them on dozens of worlds. Within hours, most prisoners started to break. They cried. They screamed. They hurt themselves. Some went crazy. Some became like empty shells. All of them eventually gave up. But the humans did something unexpected. They adapted. Colonel Morrison sat cross-legged in his cell with his eyes closed. When the temperature dropped to freezing, he controlled his breathing and stayed still. When it became burning hot, he regulated his body through meditation. He ignored the guards. He ignored the lack of sleep. He just existed, saving his strength, General Hayes did exercises in her cell. Push-ups, squats, sit-ups. She kept her body strong despite the hunger and exhaustion. She counted each repetition out loud in a steady voice that never wavered. Admiral Nakamura studied his cell. He examined every joint and corner. He traced patterns on the clear walls with his finger, making mental notes. He looked at the guards with calm eyes, as if he was recording everything for later use. Commander Rivera used the reflections in the walls to make hand signals to other prisoners. The Crithians had not thought about blocking human sign language. Within days, the prisoners were communicating with each other. They shared information. They coordinated their actions. They worked together. The guards became more and more nervous. These prisoners were not breaking. They were not showing fear. Instead, they seemed to be getting stronger, more organized, more dangerous. Zell came to Vexthor on the 4th day. He said the humans were not responding to the prison. They showed no signs of psychological damage. No fear, no submission. They acted like they were just waiting patiently like predators. Vexthor was angry. He ordered the conditions to be made worse. Less food, more extreme temperatures, random loud noises, strange smells, anything to break these stubborn humans. The conditions became terrible. Food came only once every 2 days, and there was barely enough to survive. The temperature swings became extreme. High-pitched sounds played at random times. Lights flickered constantly. The air was filled with bad odors. The humans adapted to everything. They divided their small food portions equally through hand signals, making sure no one starved. They created sleep schedules, taking turns watching while others rested. They turned the temperature changes into training. They helped each other stay strong. Then something even more disturbing happened. The humans began to sing. Colonel Morrison started humming a military song during his meditation. Within hours, others joined in. They created harmony across the prison. The songs were proud and defiant. They sang about home. They sang about freedom. They sang about never giving up. The Crithian guards were veterans of many invasions. They had seen thousands of prisoners. But these humans were different. They should have been broken by now. Instead, they were singing. They were growing stronger together. They were becoming more unified and more dangerous even in prison. For the first time in his long career, Commander Vexthor felt something he had never felt before. He felt uncertainty. These humans were not like any species he had conquered. They did not fear death. They did not break under torture. They did not surrender. He decided it was time for a more direct approach. He would personally interrogate the senior prisoner. He would extract information and submission through techniques that had never failed. He chose Colonel Morrison as his first subject. He was confident the human would finally break under professional interrogation. But Vexthor did not understand humans. He did not understand what made them different. He was about to learn a lesson that would terrify him and change everything. The interrogation room was designed to destroy hope. Vexthor had spent decades perfecting this space. The prisoner was suspended in the center by invisible energy fields. It was impossible to find a comfortable position. Holographic screens showed their home planet being destroyed. Images of their loved ones suffering played on repeat. Everything was designed to make them feel small, helpless, and alone. Guards brought Colonel Morrison into the room. They had blindfolded him during transport. When they removed the blindfold, they expected him to panic. Most prisoners screamed when they saw the interrogation room. Some fainted. Others begged immediately. Morrison looked around the room calmly. He tested the energy fields holding him, studying how they worked. He watched the holographic displays showing burning cities on Earth, examining them carefully. Then he looked directly at Vexthor and waited in silence. His face showed no fear, only patience. Vexthor walked around the suspended human. All 4 of his arms moved as he spoke. The translation device made his words come out in perfect English. He told Morrison that Earth was conquered. The military was destroyed. The government had fallen. Humans had no hope of winning. Cooperate and he could have an easier life. Refuse, and he would watch everything he loved turn to ash. Morrison said nothing. He just kept looking at Vexthor with those calm, cold eyes. It was the way a hunter looks at prey. Patient and calculating, Vexthor activated a pain device. It sent waves of agony through the nervous system without causing any physical damage. Most species started screaming within seconds. The pain was designed to be unbearable. Morrison's jaw tightened. Sweat appeared on his forehead. His muscles tensed, but he made no sound. When the device turned off after 30 seconds, he took one deep breath and returned to watching Vexthor with that same unsettling calm. Vexthor felt a flicker of surprise. He said that Morrison had impressive pain tolerance, but this was only the beginning. They had drugs that would make him tell everything. They had techniques that had broken warriors much stronger than humans. Why suffer when the outcome was certain? Morrison finally spoke. His voice was rough but steady. He said that Vexthor was making a mistake. Vexthor's mandibles clicked in what was Crithian laughter. He said he commanded the fleet that conquered Earth in 2 days. He had crushed 74 civilizations. What mistake could he possibly be making? Morrison said that Vexthor thought he had won. He thought capturing leaders and destroying cities meant he had conquered humanity, but he did not understand humans. Pain could not break them. Death could not frighten them. Vexthor had given them something far more dangerous than hope. Vexthor demanded to know what that was. Morrison said it was purpose. Every moment Vexthor kept them prisoner. Every torture he used, every threat he made just proved that he was afraid of humans. Vexthor had conquered 74 worlds, but none of them scared him enough to need this level of interrogation. He was afraid because he saw something in humans that he had never encountered before, and he was right to be afraid. Vexthor activated the pain device again, this time for a full minute. Morrison's body shook in the energy field, but when it ended, he was still conscious, still watching Vexthor with those predator eyes. Vexthor tried to keep his voice steady. He said Morrison spoke of fear, but Morrison was the prisoner. Vexthor was the conqueror. How was Vexthor supposed to fear a captive human? Morrison smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. He said that Vexthor needed to understand human history. Humans were a species that evolved by being hunted by everything with teeth and claws. They survived ice ages, plagues, asteroids, and their own destructive nature. They had fought wars that killed millions of their own kind, and they never stopped fighting. They had been invaded before, enslaved before, nearly exterminated before, and they were still here. Vexthor told him to continue. His mandibles had stopped clicking. Morrison explained that humans do not give up. Fear makes them angry, and anger makes them dangerous. Every human Vexthor had imprisoned was studying him, learning his weaknesses, waiting for the moment to strike. Somewhere on Earth right now, humans were organizing resistance. They were building weapons. They were planning, and they would not stop until either humans were extinct or the Crithians were gone from Earth. Humans do not surrender. They do not break. They do not forgive. For the first time in his long career, Vexthor felt genuine unease. Morrison's words rang with absolute conviction. There was no false bravado, just a cold statement of fact delivered with the certainty of someone who had seen it proven throughout history. Vexthor ordered the guards to return Morrison to his cell. He would interrogate the others. He wanted to know if they all shared this delusion. Over the next 2 weeks, Vexthor personally questioned 15 human prisoners. Each interrogation followed the same disturbing pattern. The humans endured torture without breaking. They showed no fear of death. They spoke of their history with pride and defiance. Most disturbing, they all seemed to be studying their captors, gathering information even while being tortured. General Hayes was subjected to the pain device. She calmly recited military tactics from human history. She described how outgunned, outnumbered human forces had defeated superior enemies through guerrilla warfare and refusing to surrender. When asked why she was telling him this, she smiled coldly and said she wanted him to know what was coming for him. Admiral Nakamura spent his interrogation analyzing Crithian technology. He asked technical questions about their systems with genuine curiosity. The guards became uncomfortable. He was treating his torture session as an opportunity to learn about enemy capabilities. He was taking mental notes on everything from power systems to structural engineering. Commander Rivera simply counted in different languages during his torture: English, Spanish, Japanese, Arabic. He was maintaining mental discipline through mathematical patterns. When Vexthor demanded to know what he hoped to accomplish, Rivera replied that he was staying sharp, keeping his mind active, waiting. Vexthor asked what he was waiting for. Rivera answered that he was waiting for Vexthor to make a mistake. He already had, actually. He had showed them that Crithians were not invincible. He had revealed that they used intimidation, because they could not maintain control through strength alone. He had proven that they were afraid, and fear makes people careless. The pattern was clear and deeply troubling. These humans were not just resisting torture. They were using their captivity to gather intelligence and maintain combat readiness. They exercised in their cells. They communicated through signs and songs. They studied their guards. They waited with the patience of hunters. Zale brought more bad news. The human resistance on Earth was not collapsing. It was growing. They were using primitive weapons, homemade explosives, and hit-and-run tactics. The Crithians had destroyed the cities, but humans had retreated into wilderness areas, underground facilities, and hardened bunkers. Every patrol sent into these areas was ambushed. They had lost 42 dropships and nearly 3,000 troops in 2 weeks. Vexthor could not believe it. They had destroyed human military infrastructure. There should be no organized resistance. Zale explained that human military infrastructure was not what they thought. Humans apparently kept vast stockpiles of weapons in civilian areas. Their population had extensive firearms training. Their entertainment media had prepared them mentally for invasion scenarios. They had a cultural concept where civilians maintained survival supplies and defensive capabilities. The Crithians had conquered the government and military, but they had not conquered the population. Vexthor decided to make an example. He would bring all the human prisoners to the main observation deck. They would watch as the fleet destroyed one of their major cities. The broadcast would go across the planet. Humans would see the price of resistance. Their spirit would finally break. The 200 human prisoners were forced to the observation deck. The fleet positioned itself over the ruins of New York City. Millions of survivors had retreated into the subway systems and underground areas. Vexthor announced that they should watch carefully. This was what happened when humans refused to accept reality, surrender, and they would show mercy, continue fighting, and every major city would suffer the same fate. The fleet's weapons powered up. The prisoners were expected to beg for mercy, to finally show the fear that would break their resistance. Instead, Colonel Morrison stepped forward. He spoke in a clear, strong voice that silenced everyone. He told Vexthor to do it, show them. Show every human watching what the Crithians really were. Show them that Crithians had no honor, no mercy, only brutality. Give every survivor on Earth another reason to hate them, to fight them, to never stop until the Crithians were driven from Earth or humans were extinct. Fire the weapons. Make martyrs of millions. See what that buys you. The other prisoners began to sing. It was a funeral song, solemn and powerful. They sang for the people about to die. They sang in defiance of their captors. They sang without fear. Their voices echoed through the observation deck. Vexthor looked at the assembled humans. For the first time in his career as a conqueror, he hesitated. He had broken 74 species. But these humans were different. They did not fear death. If he killed millions of their kind, it would. Vexthor sat alone in his private quarters, staring at data files on his screen. In over 3 centuries of conquest, he had never encountered a species like humanity. Other races valued survival above everything. They sought compromise with their conquerors. They eventually accepted their new reality. But humans seemed to value resistance more than life itself. He accessed the Crithian military database, searching for any species that had shown similar characteristics. The results appeared on his screen, and they made his mandibles twitch nervously. There were 7 species in galactic history that had refused to surrender, even when facing total extinction. All 7 had eventually driven off or destroyed their would-be conquerors. 3 of those species had hunted down their attackers across space and exterminated them entirely as revenge. The data was clear and terrifying. The common thread among these species was obvious. They were all apex predators from death worlds, planets where survival required constant aggression and adaptation. They all had evolutionary histories of overcoming stronger, larger threats through cooperation, tool use, and absolute refusal to submit. They all had cultures that glorified resistance and considered death with honor better than life in chains. Earth qualified as a death world by every measurement. Humanity had evolved fighting creatures far stronger and faster than themselves. They had survived planetary disasters that would have ended less adaptable species. Their history was an endless cycle of conflict, survival, and revenge. And unlike the other 7 species, humans had achieved all this while still confined to a single world. Their full potential had not yet been reached. A signal interrupted his thoughts. Zale entered with urgent news. His voice was shaking slightly as he spoke. The human prisoners had somehow communicated with resistance forces on the surface. They had intercepted a message being transmitted from the detention level using a homemade radio built from scavenged materials. The message was simple but powerful. Stay strong. Do not surrender. We are with you. Vex Thor demanded to know how this was possible. They monitored every cell constantly. They jammed all communications. How did humans build a transmitter under complete surveillance? Zale's explanation was disturbing. The humans had used materials from their own bodies. Hair for conductors, saliva for electrolytes, blood for chemical components. They had turned biological waste into technology. The human engineer, Admiral Nakamura, had apparently designed the device entirely in his head and communicated the plans to others through hand signals. These humans were more dangerous as prisoners than most species were as soldiers. Vex Thor closed his compound eyes. Everything about this invasion had gone wrong. The humans should have broken by now. Instead, they were strengthening, organizing, and somehow turning captivity into an advantage. He needed to understand what they were facing. He ordered Zale to bring Colonel Morrison to his quarters. Not for interrogation, not for torture. He needed to talk, to understand. Morrison was brought without chains or guards, an unprecedented gesture. The human colonel studied Vex Thor with those calm, calculating eyes. He waited patiently for the alien commander to speak. Vex Thor spoke slowly. He said that the human prisoners were not prisoners of war. They were hostages. They were leverage. But humans did not care about their own survival, did they? Morrison replied that they cared about their mission. Right now, their mission was to demonstrate to their people that humans do not break. Every day they survived torture. Every day they resisted, they gave hope to resistance forces on Earth. They proved that Krithians were not invincible. They showed that Krithians could be defied. Yes, they were leverage, but not in the way Vex Thor intended. Vex Thor asked what it would take for humanity to surrender. What terms would be acceptable? Morrison laughed. It was a harsh sound without humor. He said there were no acceptable terms. Vex Thor had invaded their world, killed their people, burned their cities. Even if Krithians withdrew today, humanity would never forgive that. They would spend the next century building weapons, training soldiers, and preparing for the day they came for the Krithians. Vex Thor had made an enemy that would never stop, never forget, and never forgive. Vex Thor protested that this was not rational. Revenge was not worth extinction. Morrison said that Vex Thor assumed humans would lose. Humans did not make that assumption. They had overcome worse odds before. They survived when all the large predators wanted to eat them. They survived when diseases killed a third of their population. They survived 2 world wars that killed nearly 100 million of their own kind. And they came out of each crisis stronger than before. Krithians were just the latest threat. And like all the others, humans would either defeat them or die trying. There was no third option in human psychology. Vex Thor was silent for a long moment. Then he asked the question that had been troubling him since the invasion began. Why did humans not fear death? Every species they had conquered feared death above all else. It was the tool that moved them. But humans walked toward death like it was an old friend. Morrison's voice became quiet but intense. He said death was not the worst thing that could happen to a human. Surrender was worse. Slavery was worse. Living as cowards who let their families and world be destroyed without resistance was worse. Death with honor was better than survival with shame. That was a core human value, and it was why Vex Thor had already lost this war. Morrison continued. He explained that humans had a long history of fighting against impossible odds. Small groups of humans had defeated entire armies. Outnumbered defenders had held positions until the last person fell. Resistance movements had operated for decades under brutal occupation. It was not about winning quickly. It was about never giving up, never accepting defeat, never letting the enemy rest. He told Vex Thor about resistance movements from human history, how occupied populations had made life hell for conquerors, how they sabotaged infrastructure, how they ambushed patrols, how they made every day costly, how they turned the invaders' strength into a weakness by making them afraid to leave their fortified positions. Morrison leaned forward. He said that right now humans on Earth were studying every destroyed Krithian dropship. They were analyzing captured weapons. They were learning how Krithian technology worked. They were adapting, In 6 months, they would have countermeasures. In a year, they would have equivalent weapons. In 5 years, they would have ships that could reach the Crithian homeworld. Vexthor said that was impossible. Humans were centuries behind Crithian technology. Morrison smiled grimly. He said humans had a saying, "Necessity is the mother of invention." When survival was at stake, humans innovated at incredible speed. They had gone from the first powered flight to landing on their moon in 66 years. They had developed nuclear weapons in 3 years when facing an existential threat. They had created global communication networks in decades. When properly motivated, human ingenuity was terrifying. He continued, the Crithians had given humans the ultimate motivation. They had united a fractured species against a common enemy. Before the invasion, humans fought among themselves constantly. Now every human on Earth had the same goal: drive out the invaders, learn their technology, become strong enough that no one would ever dare invade again. Morrison's voice became harder. He said that Vexthor thought he was fighting a war. But he was not. He was creating a legend, a story that would define humanity for generations. The story of how humans refused to break, how they resisted the unbeatable enemy, how they turned torture into training and captivity, into intelligence gathering, how they sang songs of defiance while their captors grew afraid. He said that if Vexthor killed every prisoner on this ship, it would not break human resistance. It would strengthen it. The dead would become martyrs. Their names would be remembered. Their sacrifice would inspire billions. Every human child would grow up hearing how their leaders showed no fear in the face of alien conquerors. That story would fuel resistance for centuries. Vexthor felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of conquest. He felt fear, not fear of dying, fear of the consequences of his actions, fear that he had awakened something that could not be controlled or defeated, fear that humanity was exactly what Morrison claimed, an enemy that would never stop. Morrison stood to leave. Before the guards could escort him back, he turned and said one final thing. He told Vexthor that there was still a choice. Withdraw now before more Crithian blood was spilled. Leave Earth and never come back. The alternative was a war that would last generations. A war where every Crithian soldier would learn to fear the sound of human laughter in the dark. A war that would end with either human extinction or Crithian defeat. And Vexthor should ask himself which outcome was more likely. After Morrison was taken away, Vexthor called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. He shared the data he had found about species that refused to surrender. He shared the reports of mounting casualties on Earth. He shared his conversation with Morrison. The debate lasted for hours. Some officers wanted to increase the brutality, make an example so terrible that humans would have to surrender. Others argued that brutality had already failed. It only made humans more determined. Finally, Zale spoke what everyone was thinking. He said they had 2. The order to withdraw came as a shock to the entire Crithian fleet. Junior officers could not believe what they were hearing. They had never retreated from a primitive world before. They had never abandoned a conquest halfway through. It went against everything they had been taught, everything they believed about Crithian superiority. But the senior commanders understood. They had read the reports. They had seen the casualty numbers. They had watched the prisoners who showed no fear. They knew that this invasion had become something different, something dangerous. Vexthor stood on the bridge of the Dominator and gave the commands. All ground forces were to return to the ships immediately. All operations on Earth were to cease. The fleet would leave orbit within 72 hours. The human prisoners would be released unharmed. That last order caused the most confusion. Release the prisoners. Give back their military leaders? It made no tactical sense. But Vexthor had his reasons. Keeping the prisoners would give humans a reason to pursue the Crithians across space. Releasing them was a gesture, a way of saying that this conflict was over. Before the prisoners were released, Vexthor recorded a message. It would be played to each human as they were returned to Earth. He wanted them to understand why the Crithians were leaving. He wanted them to carry a message back to their people. In the message, Vexthor spoke slowly and clearly. He said they had come to conquer Earth. Instead, they had learned why conquest has limits. Humans could not be broken by force. They could not be intimidated by death. They could not be controlled by fear. The Crithians were withdrawing not in defeat, but in recognition that some species were too dangerous to fight. He continued. He said they came as conquerors. They were leaving with the understanding that humanity was better left alone. For the sake of both species, he hoped they would never meet again. The galaxy was vast. There was no reason for their paths to cross. The human prisoners were loaded into drop pods. They were given emergency supplies and medical kits. Their injuries from interrogation were treated. They were returned to the surface at designated safe zones far from combat areas. Colonel Morrison's pod landed in what used to be the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. The city was in ruins. Buildings were collapsed. Streets were torn up. But as he climbed out of the pod, he saw movement. Human fighters emerging from hiding. Resistance members who had been watching and waiting. General Hayes landed near the ruins of London. Admiral Nakamura touched down outside Tokyo. Commander Rivera returned to Sao Paulo. All across the planet, the 200 prisoners were coming home. And at each landing site, they were greeted by human resistance fighters who had never stopped fighting. Morrison stood in the ruins and looked up at the sky. The massive Crithian ships were pulling back from orbit. Slowly, systematically, the entire fleet was withdrawing. After 3 weeks of occupation, the aliens were leaving. Other released prisoners gathered around him. Hayes walked up, her face showing exhaustion but also grim satisfaction. She said they would be back eventually. The Crithians or someone else. Now that humans knew they were not alone in the universe, everything had changed. Morrison agreed. He said to let them come. Humans had learned from this encounter. They had Crithian technology to study. They had proof that their determination was their greatest weapon. And most importantly, they had shown themselves what humans could accomplish when they refused to surrender. Nakamura approached them, already examining pieces of a destroyed Crithian drone he had found in the rubble. He said he had identified 3 critical flaws in their engineering. Give him a year and he could build weapons that would make the Crithians regret ever hearing about Earth. Give him a decade, and humans would have ships that could reach the Crithian homeworld. Rivera joined them, carrying communication equipment salvaged from the landing area. He said the resistance networks were still intact. Underground bases were operational. Weapon stockpiles were untouched. The Crithians had occupied the surface, but humans had prepared for a long war. They had supplies and plans for years of resistance. Morrison looked at his fellow officers. They were exhausted, injured, and had endured weeks of torture. But their eyes were sharp and focused. They were already thinking about the future. Already planning, he told them to get to work. All of them. Humanity had survived this invasion. They had resisted when the aliens thought they would break. They had taught the galaxy a lesson about what it meant to threaten humanity. Now they needed to make sure that lesson was never forgotten. A young resistance fighter approached them nervously. She could not have been more than 20 years old. She asked if it was really over. Were the aliens really leaving? Morrison looked at her. He said the invasion was over. But the war was just beginning. Not a war of survival anymore. A war of preparation. Humans would rebuild. They would study alien technology. They would prepare for the day when they were ready to go out into the galaxy themselves. And when that day came, every species out there would know that humans were not prey. They were predators. News of the withdrawal spread across Earth rapidly. Resistance cells that had been preparing for years of guerrilla warfare suddenly found themselves victorious. Cities that had been abandoned were reclaimed. Survivors emerged from underground shelters. The fighting stopped, but there was no celebration. Humans had lost too much. Millions were dead from the initial bombardment. Cities were destroyed. Infrastructure was ruined. It would take decades to rebuild. And every human knew that the galaxy was full of hostile species now. Earth had been found. The invasion could happen again. In the days following the withdrawal, human leaders from around the world gathered in a secure underground facility. They needed to decide what came next. The world had been united by the invasion, but old divisions could easily return. They needed to stay united. Morrison stood before the assembly and spoke. He told them what he had learned from the Crithians. Earth was considered a death world. Humanity was seen as dangerously aggressive. The aliens had withdrawn because they recognized that humans would never stop fighting. That was humanity's strength. That was what had saved them. He proposed a new direction for humanity. They would rebuild, but differently. Every city would have underground defenses. Every citizen would receive basic combat training. Weapons stockpiles would be maintained globally. Humanity would never be caught unprepared again. More importantly, they would focus on space technology. They had captured Crethean equipment. They had seen their ships. They had learned about their faster-than-light travel. Human scientists and engineers would reverse engineer everything. Within a generation, humans would have their own fleet. Hayes added that they needed to change how they thought about warfare. The Cretheans had superior technology but had failed because they underestimated human psychology. Future enemies would make the same mistake. Humans needed to understand and use their psychological advantages. She explained that humans had evolved as persistence hunters. They did not need to be the fastest or strongest. They just needed to never give up. That same trait applied to warfare. Humans could lose battle after battle and still win the war through sheer refusal to surrender. Nakamura presented his findings on Crethean technology. Their systems were sophisticated but not indestructible. Human engineers could learn from their designs and improve upon them. He estimated that within 5 years, humans would have basic spacecraft. Within 10 years, they would have weapons that could threaten any ship in orbit. Within 20 years, they would have their own interstellar fleet. Rivera spoke about maintaining the resistance networks. Even during peacetime, humans needed to stay organized. The communication systems, supply caches, and underground bases that had been built for the resistance should remain active. If another invasion came, humanity would be ready from day one. The assembly voted unanimously. Humanity would unite under a single military command structure. Resources would be pooled. Knowledge would be shared. Every nation would contribute to the common defense. The old divisions and conflicts seemed petty now that humans knew they were not alone in a hostile universe. A new organization was formed. The Unified Earth Defense Force. Its mission was simple: protect humanity, develop space technology, prepare for the future, never be conquered again. Morrison was appointed as its first commander, not because he wanted the position, but because he had shown during captivity what human leadership looked like. He had endured torture without breaking. He had inspired others through his calm defiance. He had taught the aliens to fear humanity. In his acceptance speech, Morrison was brief. He said humans had been given a gift, the gift of knowing they were not alone, the gift of understanding their own strength, the gift of unity forged in fire. They would use that gift to build a future where no species would ever dare threaten Earth again. He ended with a simple statement that would become the motto of the Defense Force. We do not surrender. We do not break. We do not fear. The assembled leaders raised their voices in agreement. The words echoed through the underground chamber. A promise, a threat, a declaration to the galaxy. Humanity had survived its first contact with alien life. They had learned they were considered prey. Now they would prove they were predators. 5 years had passed since the Crethean withdrawal. Earth had changed in ways that would have seemed impossible before the invasion. Cities were being rebuilt, but now every building had reinforced shelters beneath it. Every school taught survival skills alongside mathematics and literature. Every adult had received basic combat training and knew how to use a weapon. The old national boundaries still existed on maps, but they meant little now. Humanity had truly unified. Resources flowed where they were needed without political barriers. Scientists shared discoveries instantly across global networks. Engineers collaborated on projects regardless of their country of origin. The invasion had done what centuries of diplomacy could not. It had made humans see themselves as one species. The most dramatic changes were happening in orbit. Massive construction projects floated above Earth. Shipyards built from salvaged Crethean materials and human ingenuity. Admiral Nakamura had made good on his promise. Humanity was building its own fleet. The first human-built spacecraft were crude compared to Crethean ships. They were slower, less efficient, and required huge amounts of energy. But they worked. They could reach orbit independently. They could maneuver in space. Most importantly, they were armed with weapons reverse-engineered from captured alien technology. Commander Morrison, now promoted to Fleet Admiral, stood in the command center of the orbital shipyard. Through the massive viewing windows, he could see 3 destroyers under construction. Beyond them, the skeleton of something larger was taking shape. Humanity's first capital ship, a vessel designed not for exploration but for war. General Hayes entered the command center carrying a data tablet. She had been appointed as head of military intelligence for the Defense Force. Her network of analysts had been monitoring deep space constantly, watching for any sign of returning alien ships. She told Morrison they had detected something. Long-range sensors had picked up unusual energy signatures at the edge of the solar system. It could be natural phenomena, or it could be ships. They would know more in a few hours. Morrison felt his heart rate increase slightly, but his face remained calm. He asked if the defensive platforms were operational. Hayes confirmed they were. Over the past 5 years, humans had built a network of weapons platforms in orbit. Railguns, missile batteries, and energy weapons based on Crithian designs. Earth was no longer defenseless. He ordered the fleet to battle stations. The 3 operational destroyers powered up their weapon systems. Ground forces around the world went to high alert. This was what they had been preparing for. The moment when the galaxy came back to test humanity again. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. The energy signatures grew stronger, more defined. Definitely artificial. Definitely ships. But something was odd. The signatures did not match Crithian technology. These were different vessels. A different species. When the ships finally became visible on long-range scans, human analysts worked frantically to gather information. 5 vessels, smaller than Crithian warships but more advanced in design. They were approaching slowly, broadcasting on multiple frequencies. They seemed to be trying to communicate. The message was decoded by human computers. It was in a universal trade language that had been found in Crithian databases. The message was simple. The approaching ships were from the Velar Coalition, a group of species that traded across the galaxy. They came in peace. They wanted to talk. Morrison was suspicious. Every instinct told him this could be a trick, but he also knew that humanity could not remain isolated forever. If they wanted to join the galactic community, they needed to take risks. He authorized a response message. The Velar ships could approach Earth, but they would remain under constant surveillance. Any hostile action would result in immediate retaliation. The lead Velar ship transmitted a request for a diplomatic meeting. Representatives from the coalition wanted to meet with human leaders aboard a neutral space station they would construct at a safe distance from Earth. Morrison agreed, but insisted that human military vessels would be present. The Velar accepted these terms. A week later, Morrison found himself aboard a human destroyer, traveling to the meeting point. With him were Hayes, Nakamura, and a team of diplomats hastily trained in first contact protocols. They were about to meet representatives from an alien civilization. This time, hopefully, without violence. The Velar had constructed a small space station in less than a day. Human engineers watched in amazement at their technology. These aliens were clearly more advanced than even the Crithians. If this was a trap, humanity was in serious trouble. The Velar representatives were not what humans expected. They looked almost plant-like, with green skin and graceful movements. Their leader introduced herself as Ambassador Lyra. She spoke through a translation device, and her voice was pleasant and melodic. Lyra explained why they had come. Word had spread across the galaxy about what happened on Earth. The Crithians had invaded a primitive world and been forced to withdraw. That was unprecedented. The story had become famous. Many species were curious about these humans who showed no fear. More importantly, the Crithian commander had filed official reports. In those reports, he classified Earth as a death world and humanity as a warrior species. He recommended that Earth be placed under galactic protection status. No species should attempt invasion or conquest. The risk was too great. Morrison was surprised. He asked why the Crithians would protect a species they had tried to conquer. Lyra explained that it was not about protection. It was about warning. The Crithians wanted other species to know what they had learned. Humanity was too dangerous to fight, too stubborn to control, too innovative to predict. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson from Earth. Some species were better left alone, she continued. The Velar Coalition had come to offer humanity a different path. Instead of remaining isolated, humans could join the galactic community as equals. They could trade, share knowledge, and participate in the broader civilization, but only if they wanted to. The coalition would not force contact. Hayes was skeptical. She asked what the coalition gained from this offer. Species did not travel across the galaxy out of pure altruism. Lyra was honest. She said the coalition was interested in human psychological and military capabilities. There were threats in the galaxy. Species that conquered and enslaved others. The Crithians were only one example. If humans were as formidable as reports suggested, they could be valuable allies. Morrison considered carefully. This was a critical moment. Humanity could remain isolated, focusing on defense and preparing for future attacks, or they could engage with the galaxy, learning from other species while sharing their own knowledge. Both paths had risks. He told Lyra that humanity was interested in dialogue, but trust would take time to build. Humans had been invaded once. They would not lower their guard easily. The coalition would need to prove their intentions through actions, not just words. Lyra agreed. She proposed a series of small exchanges: technology for technology, knowledge for knowledge, cultural exchanges, trade agreements, gradually building a relationship based on mutual benefit and respect. The negotiations lasted for several days. Details were hammered out. Safeguards were established. Both sides would maintain military readiness. Both sides would share only what they were comfortable sharing. It was a cautious beginning, but it was a beginning. When Morrison returned to Earth, he addressed the Global Assembly. He told them about the Valor Coalition and the proposal. Humanity had a choice to make. They could remain isolated, strong but alone, or they could engage with the galaxy, taking risks but gaining opportunities. The debate was intense. Some argued that isolation was safest. Others insisted that humanity needed allies and knowledge to survive in a hostile universe. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Humanity would engage with the coalition, but carefully. Military defenses would remain at maximum. Earth would never be vulnerable again. In the years that followed, human ships began venturing beyond the solar system. Trade routes were established. Diplomatic missions were exchanged. Human technology advanced rapidly through exposure to galactic knowledge, but humans never forgot the lessons of the invasion. Every human ship was armed. Every human colony maintained defensive capabilities. Every human child learned the history of the Crithian invasion and the lesson it taught. Humans do not surrender. Humans do not break. Humans do not fear. The galaxy slowly learned what the Crithians had discovered. Humanity was not a species to be conquered. They were a species to be respected. Their determination, their ingenuity, and their absolute refusal to submit made them unique. Other species told stories about the humans who showed no fear in captivity, about the prisoners who sang while being tortured, about the species that turned an invasion into an awakening. These stories spread across the galaxy, becoming legend. 10 years after the invasion, Morrison stood in the completed human capital ship. It was named Resolution, a fitting name for the first true warship of humanity. From the bridge, he could see Earth below, beautiful and blue. He could also see the dozens of defensive platforms, the shipyards, and the patrol vessels. Humanity had become a spacefaring civilization. Hayes joined him at the viewing port. She said they had come far in 10 years, from a conquered species to a galactic power. 25 years after the Crithian invasion, humanity had transformed beyond recognition. The solar system was no longer just Earth and empty space. Permanent colonies existed on Mars, the Moon, and several orbital stations. Mining operations extracted resources from asteroids. Manufacturing facilities operated in zero gravity, producing ships and technology that would have seemed like magic before the invasion. The human fleet now numbered over 200 ships: destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and support vessels. They patrolled human space constantly, ensuring that no threat could approach Earth undetected. The ships were crewed by a new generation of humans who had grown up knowing they were not alone in the universe. But the most significant change was psychological. Humans had gone from seeing themselves as the center of the universe to understanding they were newcomers in a vast galactic civilization. This knowledge had changed them, made them more cautious but also more ambitious. They were determined not just to survive but to excel. Admiral Morrison, now in his 60s but still sharp and active, commanded the human fleet from the Resolution. The capital ship had been upgraded multiple times over the years. It was now one of the most formidable vessels in known space. Not because of superior alien technology, but because humans had taken alien designs and improved them with their own innovations. One day, a priority message came through from Coalition Space. It was from Ambassador Lyra, who had remained humanity's primary contact with the broader galaxy. The message was urgent. A crisis was developing that required immediate discussion. She requested a meeting at the nearest coalition station. Morrison took the resolution and a small escort fleet to the meeting point. When he arrived, he found not just Lyra, but representatives from a dozen other species. The mood in the conference room was tense. Something serious was happening. Lyra explained the situation. The Crithian Empire was expanding again. They had conquered 3 more worlds in the past year. But this time they were being more careful. They were avoiding death worlds and warrior species. They were targeting peaceful civilizations with no military tradition. Entire populations were being enslaved. The coalition had tried diplomatic pressure, but the Crithians ignored them. Trade sanctions had no effect on a species that took what they wanted by force. Military intervention was being considered, but the coalition members were traders and diplomats, not warriors. Their fleets were designed for protection, not conquest. Then Lyra turned to Morrison. She said the coalition wanted to hire human military forces. They wanted humanity to lead a campaign against the Crithian expansion. Humans had proven they could stand against the Crithians. Now the galaxy was asking them to fight not for survival, but for others. Morrison was silent for a long moment. This was not a decision he could make alone. He told Lyra he needed to consult with Earth's government. This would require a global vote. Humanity had spent 25 years preparing to defend themselves. Going on the offensive was something different entirely. He returned to Earth and presented the situation to the Global Assembly. The debate was fierce. Some argued that humanity should stay out of galactic conflicts. They had their own security to worry about. Others insisted that humanity had a responsibility to help. They knew what it was like to be invaded. How could they stand by while others suffered the same fate? General Hayes, now retired but still influential, spoke at the assembly. She reminded everyone of what they had learned during the invasion. The Crithians had left because they recognized humanity would never stop fighting. But they had not changed their nature. They were still conquerors, still slavers. If humanity did nothing, the Crithians would grow stronger. Eventually, they might return to Earth with better preparation. She argued that the best defense was to stop the Crithians now, while they were focused elsewhere. Show them that humanity was not just defending their own world, but willing to fight for others. Make the Crithians understand that humanity was a force to be feared across the galaxy, not just on Earth. The vote was close, but ultimately the decision was made. Humanity would intervene. They would send a fleet to confront the Crithians. But this would not be a war of conquest. It would be a liberation. They would free the enslaved populations and then withdraw. Humanity would not become the new oppressor. Morrison assembled a task force. 50 ships, the largest human military deployment in history. They were joined by coalition vessels that would provide support and medical aid. The combined fleet traveled to the nearest Crithian-occupied world, a planet called Varus that had been conquered 6 months earlier. The Crithian garrison at Varus numbered 20 warships. They detected the approaching fleet and prepared for battle. Their commander sent a message demanding that the human ships turn back. This was Crithian territory now. Interference would be considered an act of war. Morrison's response was simple. He broadcast a message on all frequencies. He told the Crithians that humanity remembered their invasion. They remembered the torture, the threats, the attempted genocide. And they had not forgotten the lesson they taught the Crithians 25 years ago. Humans do not fear death. They do not surrender, and they do not forgive those who enslave others. He gave the Crithians one chance. Withdraw from Varus peacefully. Release the enslaved population. Leave and never return, or face humanity in battle. The Crithians had 30 minutes to decide. The Crithian commander must have accessed his historical records. He must have read the reports from 25 years ago. He must have seen Commander Vexthor's warnings about humanity. Because after 28 minutes, the Crithian ships began to withdraw from orbit. They did not fight. They did not call for reinforcements. They simply left. The garrison commander sent one final message. He said they remembered Earth. They remembered the humans who showed no fear. They would not make the mistake of fighting humanity again. The human fleet moved into orbit around Varus. Medical teams went to the surface to help the freed population. Engineers began repairing damaged infrastructure. And Morrison sent a message to the Crithian Empire's leadership, a formal declaration that humanity would oppose Crithian expansion. Any world they conquered would be liberated. Any fleet they sent would be met with force. The message spread across the galaxy rapidly. Humanity, a species barely 25 years into space travel, had challenged one of the most powerful empires in known space. And the Crythians had backed down without firing a shot. Over the following months, the pattern repeated. Human fleets approached Crythian-occupied worlds. Each time they offered the same choice: withdraw or fight. Each time the Crythians withdrew. They remembered the lesson from Earth. They would not fight a species that showed no fear. The Crythian Empire began to contract. Worlds they had held for decades were abandoned. The mere threat of human intervention was enough to make them retreat. Their reputation as unstoppable conquerors crumbled. The galaxy watched in amazement as humanity became the protector that the coalition had needed. But Morrison was not satisfied with just driving the Crythians back. He wanted to ensure this could never happen again. He proposed a new galactic organization, a defense pact where species pledged to protect each other from aggression. If any member was attacked, all members would respond. The coalition members were hesitant at first. Such an alliance could drag them into conflicts they wanted to avoid. But Morrison argued that this was the only way to ensure lasting peace. Aggressors like the Crythians only understood strength. If the peaceful species of the galaxy stood together, they could deter future invasions. Eventually, the alliance was formed. The Galactic Defense Alliance. 30 species signed the charter, pledging mutual defense. Humanity contributed the largest military force, but other species provided technology, resources, and intelligence. Together, they created a power that no single empire could challenge. Commander Vexthor, now an old Crythian retired from active service, watched these developments from his homeworld. He had warned his government this would happen. He had told them that invading Earth would have consequences. They had not listened. Now the Crythian Empire was a shadow of its former self, afraid to expand, watching as humanity became the dominant military power in the galaxy. He recorded a final message, adding it to the historical archives, a warning for future Crythians and any other species that might consider conquest. He described the invasion of Earth in detail, the humans who showed no fear, the prisoners who sang while being tortured, the species that turned suffering into strength. He ended with a simple conclusion. Humanity was proof that technology and weapons were not the only forms of power. Psychology mattered. Will mattered. Determination mattered. A species that refused to surrender could never truly be conquered. And a species that remembered its suffering would never allow others to suffer the same fate. Back on Earth, Morrison stood in front of a memorial. It listed the names of all the humans who had died during the Crythian invasion. Millions of names carved into black stone. Every year on the anniversary of the invasion, humans gathered at memorials like this around the world to remember. A young officer approached him. She had been born after the invasion, part of the new generation that grew up in a galactic civilization. She asked Morrison if he ever regretted